I discovered my wife was having an affair with her boss. Worse, my daughters knew, and they helped her hide it. So I cut them all off, rewrote my will, and what followed left them speechless for decades. For nearly 30 years I lived under the illusion that I had the kind of life most people wish for. I married Jane when we were both still figuring life out. She was 20, I was 22. We didn't have a dime to our names, scraping by on part-time jobs, but we had each other, and somehow that felt like enough. We started with nothing, no money, no safety net, just dreams and determination. And over the years, we built something real: home, a family, a life. Our daughters, Alice and Maddie, were the light of our world. Alice, the eldest at 26, had always been driven and disciplined. She wasn't just smart, she was exceptional. Valedictorian in high school, top of her graduating class in college, now on the cusp of getting married to her longtime partner. I admired her fiercely. Maddie, our youngest at 24, was the polar opposite. Carefree, kind-hearted, full of laughter. She never stressed the way Alice did. She simply floated through life with a grace and joy that melted everyone around her, especially me. From the time she could walk, Maddie was glued to my side. We were incredibly close. I thought we had something solid. I did. Jane and I had made it through life's turbulence, money problems when the kids were young, health scares, and emotional exhaustion. We fought like any couple, but always found our way back to one another. I believed we were unshakable. I imagined the two of us growing old together, gray and wrinkled, still teasing each other on the front porch. That belief was my anchor, until it wasn't. One evening last week, my world began to fall apart in the quietest way imaginable. Jane told me she had dinner plans with Alice and Maddie. They did this regularly, a little tradition they called girls' dinner. Every couple of weeks they'd pick a place and catch up over wine and dessert. They claimed it was a space for the three of them to share freely, without Dad around. I never minded. I took pride in it. I thought it was a sign of the strong, open family we'd nurtured. That night, Jane was upstairs getting ready. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through headlines on my phone while sipping coffee. Her phone buzzed beside me on the counter. I glanced at it without thinking. Just a reflex. Normally I wouldn't even look, but something, call it instinct, nudged me to check. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you tonight." It was from an unsaved number. At first I froze. It didn't make sense. My brain struggled to rationalize. Maybe it was from Alice or Maddie, a joke between them? But that made no sense. My pulse quickened. I opened the thread, my hands already beginning to shake. The texts told me everything I needed to know. The sender was her boss. The conversation was casual, flirty, and far too intimate to be professional. "Last time was amazing. Still thinking about you." Same spot tonight? The tone, the timing, the little heart emoji, none of it left room for misinterpretation. My chest felt like it was caving in. My breath came in short bursts. In that moment, the world around me blurred. This woman, my wife, my partner for nearly 3 decades, was cheating on me. I didn't know what to do. My first impulse was to storm upstairs and demand the truth, but I hesitated. I needed to be sure, not just for confrontation, but for clarity, for closure. A few minutes later, Jane came down the stairs. She looked stunning. She always made an effort for her girls' dinners, but this time it felt different. She kissed me on the cheek like she always did, and smiled as if nothing had changed. "Don't wait up, all right?" she said, her voice warm, effortless. I swallowed hard and replied, "Have fun with the girls." As soon as she stepped out, I picked up her phone again and turned on location sharing. It felt wrong, intrusive, but I was past caring. I needed answers. I watched her location on my phone, my stomach in knots. When the dot started moving, I followed it closely. And then I saw it. She wasn't going to the usual restaurant where she and the girls always met. She was headed somewhere else. A quaint little bistro on the other side of town, a place we'd gone to many times as a family, a place full of memories. Trying to hold on to a shred of hope, I texted Alice and Maddie. "Hey, what time are you meeting Mom for dinner?" Their replies came quickly. Alice responded first, 7, looking forward to it. Maddie chimed in just after, "Same here, can't wait." They were lying. My daughters, my pride, my blood, were helping their mother deceive me. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at their texts. It wasn't just Jane who had broken my trust. It was all 3 of them. People I would have taken a bullet for. People I thought I truly knew. I waited until Jane's location stopped moving. She had arrived. Without a second thought, I grabbed my keys and left the house. My heart thundered in my chest the entire drive. When I pulled up to the restaurant, I parked discreetly and walked quietly to one of the front windows. And there she was. sitting at a booth near the back, laughing. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. Sitting across from her was her boss, middle-aged, smug, relaxed. They were holding hands across the table. He leaned in as she whispered something that made them both laugh. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile wide. It wasn't a business meeting. It wasn't casual. It was intimate, familiar. Watching them together felt like being punched in the gut. My knees nearly buckled. That was my wife. The woman I gave my life to. And she looked like she belonged to someone else. I didn't go inside. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there, watching the life I thought I had dissolve into nothing. Every memory, every promise, every plan for the future, all of it became meaningless. In that moment, something inside me changed forever. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of them. Her hand resting in his, their faces glowing with laughter, completely at ease. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe a part of me still couldn't believe what I was seeing. That moment felt so surreal, so removed from the life I thought I was living. I needed something tangible to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, still sitting in my car just outside the restaurant. The image burned into my memory. My wife of nearly 30 years, smiling like a teenager in love, but not with me. It triggered a storm inside me. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief, nausea. I had no idea what to say or how to say it. I didn't know how I could even face her after what I had just witnessed. So I didn't, not right away. Instead, I opened our family group chat, the same one we used for holiday plans, funny memes, family updates, and without a single word of explanation, I dropped the photo into the thread. Just the picture. No angry message, no accusations, just a caption that read, "Well, glad you're enjoying girls' dinner." Then I powered off my phone, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and started driving. I didn't know where I was headed. I just knew I couldn't go home. Eventually, my car led me to my brother's house. I hadn't even realized I was going there until I pulled into his driveway. It was late, but when he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He stepped aside and let me in with a quiet nod. I think he could see the devastation written all over me. I muttered something about just needing a place to stay. He offered me a beer. I declined. I couldn't eat, couldn't drink. I just wanted to be alone. That night, I lay on the couch in his guest room, wide awake, staring at the ceiling like it might give me answers. My brain wouldn't stop. I kept seeing Jane's face, lit up with affection, her hand in his. I kept replaying the moment I realized my daughters had lied to me. It all ran on a loop that wouldn't shut off. How long had this been happening? How many times had they smiled in my face, pretending everything was normal? How could they, my daughters, be part of this? I'd always tried to be a good man, a present father, a loyal husband. I wasn't perfect, but I showed up. I provided. I protected. I stayed. I believed in our family. And now? Now everything felt like a cruel illusion. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. After sending that photo, after cutting the cord of silence, I just drove. I needed distance from the lies, from the betrayal, from the life that suddenly no longer made sense. The next morning, I finally turned my phone back on. Within seconds, it lit up like a Christmas tree. Dozens of missed calls, texts, and voicemails. Jane had called me relentlessly. Alice and Maddie, too. I didn't have the strength to read everything in order, so I skimmed. Jane's messages were exactly what I expected. "Please, call me. It's not what it looks like. I can explain. We need to talk." I didn't open her voicemails. I couldn't bear to hear her voice. Not yet. Then came Maddie's messages. They were different. Walls of text, paragraphs of guilt. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I never should have lied to you. I hate myself for what I did. Please don't hate me. I love you. Please talk to me. I'm terrified I ruined everything." Her boyfriend even texted me. "Hey, this is Josh. Maddie's having a panic attack. She's scared you'll never forgive her. Please call her." I read it all, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. What would I say? Then I got to Alice's message. It was short, blunt, cold. "Dad, I'm sorry you found out like this, but I think you're overreacting. Don't throw away a good marriage over one mistake." One mistake? My hands clenched around the phone. One mistake? This wasn't a single error in judgment. This was a deliberate, repeated betrayal, a coordinated lie by the woman I loved and the daughters I raised. A network of silence, designed to keep me in the dark while they played happy family to my face. The more I thought about it, the deeper the wound went. Every dinner planned, every smile, every time I asked, "What are you three up to tonight?" and they answered with sweet, empty words. They had lied to me for who knows how long, and they did it with ease. I spent most of that day spiraling through my emotions. Grief, fury, confusion. My brother tried to talk to me to get me to eat, but I wasn't ready. I needed space to breathe, to think, to just exist without anyone's voice crowding mine. By the afternoon, I knew I couldn't hold it all in forever. I had to say something, even if it was just a first step. I started with Maddie. I kept it brief. "Maddie, I love you, but what you've done has hurt me in ways I can't describe. I need space to process this. Please respect that." Her reply came seconds later. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll never forgive myself for this. I love you so much." I didn't respond. I couldn't, not yet. Then I messaged Alice. "Alice, this isn't a mistake. This is betrayal. From my entire family. Please don't contact me again until I'm ready." She didn't reply. But a few minutes later, Jane's name appeared on my screen again. More texts, more "please. Please don't take this out on the girls. Then they were only trying to protect me. They never meant to hurt you." I ignored her. I wasn't interested in her justifications. Later that evening, as the sky outside darkened into a slow, quiet twilight, I finally sat down and told my brother everything. I laid it all out, every message, every lie, every moment I'd uncovered. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he didn't try to offer advice or tell me what to do. He just said, "You didn't deserve this," and handed me another pillow for the couch. For the first time in 2 days, I cried, quietly, bitterly, the kind of cry that doesn't make a sound but leaves you hollow. I showed my brother everything, every message, every photo, every detail. His face darkened as he scrolled through the texts and stared at the image I had captured. The betrayal, the intimacy, the casual way they touched each other, he saw it all, and he was furious on my behalf. "You need to cut them all off," he said, shaking his head. "If they can do this to you, if they can lie to your face like it means nothing, why should they stay in your life? They don't respect you." His words were sharp, unfiltered, but they landed like a punch to the gut because, deep down, I knew he was right. Still, the idea of cutting off my daughters, that wasn't something I could just decide in a moment. That was different. That was permanent. That night, long after my brother had gone to bed, I sat in the quiet of his living room, letting the weight of it all press against my chest. My marriage was over. There was no denying it, no fixing, no salvaging. I didn't even want to try. Jane had made her choice, and I had seen it with my own eyes. But Alice and Maddie? That was where the line blurred. Could I ever look at them again without seeing what they had done? Could I ever trust them, knowing they had smiled at me while helping their mother betray everything we had built? I didn't have answers, only questions and pain. What I did know, without a shred of doubt, was that my life, the one I believed was built on love, trust, and shared memories, was gone. Obliterated. The fallout wasn't explosive, it was slow, creeping, like smoke curling into every corner of my existence, choking me from the inside out. By the time I got back to my brother's place that evening, the fire in me had died out. The rage, the shock, the tears. They had been replaced by something worse. Numbness. My chest felt hollow, my thoughts aimless. It was as if the foundation beneath me had crumbled, and now I was just floating, directionless. The first thing I noticed when I turned my phone back on was the silence. Earlier that day, I had been overwhelmed with buzzing notifications, calls, messages, voicemails. Now, nothing. No new texts from Maddie, no follow-ups from Alice, no long, desperate paragraphs from Jane. It was like they had given up. Or maybe they were regrouping, crafting some new strategy. Either way, the quiet was deafening, and in that silence I had room to think. Too much room. With the anger gone, I was left with nothing but pain. And questions. Endless, torturous questions. How long had this been happening? How many nights had Jane lied to my face before slipping out to meet him? Did my daughters ever hesitate? Did they feel any guilt as they fed me those carefully constructed lies? That night, I sat down with my brother again. He poured me a glass of something strong, and I poured out the entire story. Everything, from the texts I had found to the photo I had taken. From Alice and Maddie's lies to the moment I dropped the image in the family group chat like a grenade and disappeared. He sat quietly through it all, didn't interrupt, just let me talk. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "That messed up," he said finally. "I always had a feeling about Jane. She's always been a little too polished, you know? But I didn't think she'd do something like this." He paused. "And the girls, man, that's what gets me. That's low." Hearing someone else say it out loud, acknowledging the betrayal, offered a strange kind of relief. It was confirmation that I wasn't going insane, that my pain was valid. Still, it didn't make things easier. My brother's anger echoed mine, but anger wasn't what I needed most anymore. I needed direction, clarity, a way forward. The next morning, I decided to stop drowning in my own emotions and start taking back control of my life. Step 1. Financial protection. Before I could even begin to address the emotional side of things, I needed to protect myself legally and financially. I spent the better part of that day closing down joint accounts, transferring money into a private account Jane couldn't access, and securing every asset I could think of. I wasn't going to let her exploit my grief. Not a chance. But it wasn't just about Jane. As I scrolled through transactions, I kept seeing receipts and plans tied to Alice's wedding. Tens of thousands of dollars. Venues, catering deposits, dress fittings. And for what? For a daughter who looked me in the eyes and lied? Who helped orchestrate the illusion that tore my life apart? The thought made me sick. I made a mental note to speak with a lawyer. Maybe I couldn't get that money back, but I'd be damned if I gave them another cent. By mid-afternoon, I was ready to take the next big step. I started calling attorneys. My brother had a few recommendations, and I decided to meet with several before choosing. That day was a blur of offices, coffee, and retelling my story to strangers wearing forced sympathetic expressions. Once the decision was made, I headed south to Charleston, where I spent August, and in each room, I watched the same reaction unfold. The brief pause when I finished, the restrained shock, the subtle headshake before they composed themselves and launched into legal strategy. Eventually, I chose someone, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being relentless in divorce court. She didn't waste time sugarcoating anything, and I appreciated that. I told her I wanted things clean and fast, but fair. I didn't want Jane walking away with anything she hadn't earned. No loopholes, no accidental generosity. The lawyer nodded and said, "I've handled uglier than this. We'll get it done." It didn't exactly comfort me, but it was something. For the first time in days, I felt like I was regaining a sliver of control. That night, as I sat in my brother's guest room, the legal documents and financial spreadsheets spread out on the desk beside me, I started thinking about the inevitable confrontation. I hadn't spoken to Jane directly since the moment I exposed her. I hadn't given her a chance to explain. Not because I feared her word, but because I feared my reaction. I didn't trust myself to stay calm. I didn't want to yell or cry or show her any part of the pain she had caused. I didn't want her to see what she had done to me. And honestly, I didn't want to hear it. What could she possibly say that would make any of this okay? I knew I couldn't avoid Jane forever. As much as I wanted to pretend she didn't exist, the truth was unavoidable. We needed to talk. I would have to face her eventually, and when that moment came, I wanted to be ready. Not emotionally wrecked, not vulnerable to her tears or her justifications, but composed and clear-minded. I didn't want to get dragged into a swirl of her regrets, pleas, or crocodile tears. I needed to keep my focus. I needed to remember why I was doing all this. So I started writing things down. Every thought, every question that burned in my chest, every point I needed her to hear. I wrote them all on paper. Not necessarily to read them out loud, but to regain some sense of control, to feel like I had a grip on the situation. It was therapeutic, really. After days of feeling powerless, just the act of putting words down gave me a tiny foothold in the chaos. But the most difficult part wasn't Jane. It was Alice and Maddie. I hadn't said a word to either of them since the day I sent those texts, and even thinking about them made my chest tighten. How do you speak to your children after discovering they've been lying to you for months? How do you sit across from them, knowing they looked you in the eye while helping cover up a betrayal that shattered your life? I wanted so badly to believe Maddie's apologies were genuine. Her messages were desperate, filled with shame and self-loathing. But how could I trust her words now? How could I know whether any of it was real? She had already proven that she could lie to me effortlessly. And then there was Alice. Her message, so curt, so dismissive, cut me deeper than I expected. I had always known she was closer to Jane. That wasn't new, but I never imagined she would take her mother's side in something so devastating. Her response made one thing crystal clear. She had made her choice. and it wasn't me. That night, I made another decision. I wasn't going to reach out to them. Not to Alice, not to Maddie. If they wanted to repair this relationship, they'd have to come to me. I wasn't going to chase after their forgiveness or beg for their attention. They made their decisions. They aligned themselves with their mother. Now they'd have to live with that. Lying in bed at my brother's place once again, staring at the same patch of ceiling I'd been fixated on for days, I felt something unexpected. Calm. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel completely unmoored. I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't fix everything, but it gave me direction. I wasn't going to be the broken man they left behind. I wasn't going to be the one begging for scraps of decency. I was going to take back control. 2 days had passed since I fled our home and submerged myself in grief and strategy. Now it was time. I needed to confront Jane. Not for closure, because I had already made up my mind, but because she needed to hear the consequences of her choices. I wasn't doing this to argue or to understand. I was doing it to speak my truth. That night I texted her. "We need to talk tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., at the house." Her reply came almost instantly. "I'll be there, please, just let me explain." Explain what? What more could she possibly say that would matter? I didn't bother replying. Whatever she had to say, she could say it in person. The next morning I woke up early. I got dressed, packed up my things, and drove back to the place I used to call home. As I stepped through the front door, a wave of nostalgia and bitterness collided. This was our house. The one we bought together. The one where we raised our daughters, hosted birthdays, and shared Christmas mornings. Every corner held a memory. Now it felt cold, empty, contaminated. Jane arrived right on time. She stepped inside like a shadow, quiet and unsure. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, like it was a shield. I noticed something else too. Her wedding ring was gone. She hadn't even tried to keep up the illusion. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," she said softly, stopping just inside the door, her voice small and shaking. "Don't thank me," I replied. My tone was colder than I expected, but I didn't try to soften it. "I'm not here to make things easier for you." We sat down at the dining room table, the same one where we'd shared family dinners, birthday cakes, and Sunday morning pancakes. Now, it felt like a courtroom. She started talking immediately, pouring out excuses I'd already predicted. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. I was lonely. It wasn't serious. She kept cycling through those phrases, like a broken record, hoping repetition might somehow make them true. I held up my hand. "Stop." She looked startled. "I'm not here for apologies. I want answers." She blinked, confused. "What kind of answers?" "How long?" I asked. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the floor. "A few months." "Try again," I said. She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "Almost a year." I clenched my fists beneath the table. A year. An entire year of deception. A year of pretending. A year of her coming home to me, sharing my bed, saying she loved me, all while being with him. "And the girls?" I asked. "How long have they known?" She winced. Her eyes darted away again. "Not the whole time. I told them a couple of months ago." "You dragged them into it," I said, my voice rising. "You made them part of this. You turned our daughters into accomplices." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she broke into full sobs. "I didn't mean to. I never wanted to hurt you. I was so unhappy." "Unhappy," I snapped, my voice echoing in the hollow room. "You were unhappy, so you destroyed our marriage? You blew up our family? You pulled Alice and Maddie into your lies like it was nothing?" She shook her head, sobbing harder now, hands covering her face. I stood up. I couldn't look at her anymore. "You've ruined everything," I said quietly, voice shaking but firm. "Not just our marriage." But the part that haunted me most as I left the house wasn't the end of my marriage. It was what this meant for my relationship with Alice and Maddie. How was I supposed to trust them again? How could I look into their eyes and not see the betrayal staring back at me? They had been part of the lie, maybe not from the very beginning, but long enough. And that hurt just as deeply. "I didn't want them to lie to you," Jane whispered behind me, her voice trembling. "I didn't want any of this." "Then why did you do it?" I asked, turning back to face her. "If you were so unhappy, why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you talk to me, instead of sneaking around behind my back?" She didn't respond, or maybe she did, but by then it didn't matter. Nothing she could say would erase what she'd done. No excuse, no tearful explanation would ever undo the damage. After a long silence, I stood up straight and said the words I'd been holding in since the moment I saw her hand in his. "I'm filing for divorce. You'll hear from my lawyer soon." Her face paled. "Please don't do this," she begged, stepping forward. "We can work through this. We can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," I interrupted. "You made your choice, Jane. Now I'm making mine." I walked to the door, ready to leave what was once our home behind. But just before I stepped out, I paused, turned back one last time, and added, "And by the way, don't expect me to pay for Alice's wedding anymore. She can ask your boss to cover it, since you're both so great at keeping secrets." Her face crumpled, and the tears started again, but I didn't wait around to watch. On my way out, I passed the hallway, filled with family photos, smiling faces, matching outfits, vacations, birthdays, the perfect image of a happy, united family. I used to love those photos. I used to stop and smile at them when I passed. Now they felt like cruel jokes. Grabbed the nearest one, a picture from Alice's high school graduation, and smashed it against the wall. The glass shattered, scattering across the floor. For a second, I felt something like satisfaction. But it was fleeting. As I walked to my car, a harsh truth settled in my chest. That confrontation, as emotionally draining as it had been, wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The real battle was just starting. Jane was no longer my wife, but Alice and Maddie were still my daughters. And I didn't know where we stood anymore. The conversation with Jane had been ugly, but at least it gave me clarity. I knew what she had done. I knew why I was leaving. My anger toward her was sharp, clean. With Alice and Maddie, though, things were murkier. They were my children, my blood, but they had made their choice. When faced with right and wrong, truth and lies, they had chosen her. The day after I informed Jane about the divorce, I decided to meet with Alice and Maddie separately. I couldn't avoid them forever, and despite everything, I wasn't ready to cut them off completely, not without hearing what they had to say. I didn't expect forgiveness, nor was I offering it, but I needed to know whether there was anything left between us worth saving. I started with Maddie. She had always been the more emotional one. Her texts over the past few days had been frantic, full of apologies and regret. I asked her to meet me at a small park near my brother's house, a quiet, neutral place. When she arrived, the toll of the past week was written all over her. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. As soon as she sat beside me on the bench, the tears started again. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she choked out, her voice raw and breaking. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you lie to me?" I asked, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Why did you cover for your mother? Did you think I'd never find out?" She shook her head quickly, wiping her eyes. "It wasn't like that," she said. "She told me about it a couple of months ago. I was furious. I told her to stop, but she begged me not to say anything. She said it was just a phase, that she was going to end it. I didn't know what to do." I listened, my face unreadable. "So you decided to protect her," I said slowly, "instead of telling me the truth." Maddie's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought she was going to stop. I didn't want to blow up the family. I thought maybe she could fix it before it got worse. "That's not good enough, Maddie," I said, my voice low. "You don't get to excuse it by saying you didn't know. You knew she was cheating. You knew she was lying, and you went along with it. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To be lied to by your own daughter?" She broke down again, her body shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I felt a pang of guilt watching her cry, but I couldn't let it soften me. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about betrayal, about the loss of trust, about the ripple effects of dishonesty. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I said quietly, "but I need you to understand just how deeply this has hurt me. Right now, I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I ever will." Maddie nodded, her shoulders trembling. "I'll do anything to fix this, Dad. Anything. Just tell me what to do." But I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what it would take, so I simply said, I needed time, and I left. My meeting with Alice, that would be a completely different story. I asked Alice to meet me at a local coffee shop. I thought it would be easier to talk somewhere neutral, someplace with no memories attached, no echoes of family dinners or birthday parties, a place where I wouldn't be surrounded by reminders of everything that used to be. She arrived 10 minutes late, and when she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked composed, put together, confident even, like nothing had happened. No visible guilt, no weight in her eyes. That alone rubbed me the wrong way. "Thanks for meeting me," she said coolly as she slid into the chair across from me. I didn't waste time. Alice, why didn't you tell me about your mother's affair? She sighed and leaned back, crossing her arms. Oh, Dad, I didn't want to get involved. That's between you and Mom. I thought it was better to stay out of it. Stay out of it? I repeated, my voice rising slightly. You didn't stay out of it, Alice. You lied to me. You helped her lie to me. That's not staying neutral. That's choosing a side. I wasn't choosing sides, she snapped, her composure cracking for the first time. I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to make things worse. Worse for who? I asked, narrowing my eyes. For me? Or for your mother? She didn't respond, and her silence told me everything I needed to know. I leaned forward, speaking slowly, firmly. You're an adult now, Alice. You're getting married. Let me ask you something. If your fiancé did to you what your mother did to me, would you want everyone around you to lie and cover for him? Or would you want someone to stand up and tell you the truth? That's different, she said quickly, frowning. Mom made a mistake. That doesn't mean you have to destroy everything. Her words hit me like a slap. A mistake? A mistake, I said, shaking my head. Is that really what you think this was? It was a mistake, she said again, more firmly this time. People make mistakes, Dad. You don't have to burn down our whole family over one bad choice. Don't bad choice, I repeated slowly, my voice low with disbelief. Do you even hear yourself? This wasn't just a mistake, Alice. It was a betrayal. Repeated betrayal. And not just from your mother, from you. From Maddie. And now you're sitting here acting like I'm the problem? I'm not saying that, she said quickly. But you're being too harsh. You're angry, and I get that. But you're going to regret cutting us out. We're your family. Family? I asked. Family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't help someone tear everything apart. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. You and Maddie didn't just lie to me. You broke my trust, and right now, I don't see how I can move past that. She folded her arms, her expression hardening. So what? You're just going to disown us? Pretend we don't exist? I don't know, I admitted honestly. But I can't pretend like nothing happened. I can't act like you didn't betray me. We sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the coffee shop filling the space between us. Finally, I stood up. I've said what I needed to say. The rest is up to you. She didn't stop me as I walked out. That night, I returned to my brother's house and sat alone in the guest room, turning over both conversations in my mind. Maddie had seemed genuinely remorseful, and while I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, I at least believed she understood the depth of the damage. Alice was different. Cold, dismissive. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong, and that made her a bigger threat to my peace. For the first time, I truly considered cutting them both out of my life. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. It wasn't born out of spite. But how do you rebuild a relationship with someone who doesn't believe they've betrayed you? That night, I made up my mind. I called my lawyer the next morning. I told her to revise my will. Alice and Maddie were to be removed as beneficiaries. Everything, my savings, my retirement, the house, would go to my sister and her children. They had always been there for me. They had never lied. They had never betrayed me. When I told my brother what I'd done, he didn't try to stop me. He just nodded and said, "You're doing the right thing. They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences." The fallout was immediate. Maddie called the next day, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Dad, please don't do this," she sobbed. "I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't care about the money. I just don't want to lose you." Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit, but I held my ground. "Maddie, I'll always love you," I said gently, "but love doesn't mean forgetting what happened. I need time. Maybe one day we can rebuild something, but right now, I can't have you in my life." She kept crying, pleading, but eventually she hung up. Alice, unsurprisingly, took a different approach. She sent me a long email, icy, calculated, accusing me of being petty, vindictive. She said I was punishing her for trying to keep the peace, and that I was ruining her wedding over something that had nothing to do with her. I didn't respond. There was no point. Jane tried to intervene next. She sent me her own email, polished and carefully worded. She begged me not to cut the girls out of the will, claimed it wasn't fair to punish them for her mistakes. She even had the audacity to say I was tearing the family apart by holding on to my anger. I didn't reply to her either. The days passed, and as they did, something strange began to happen. I started to feel lighter. The betrayal still stung, but it didn't weigh on me like it had before. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Cutting ties hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. I needed to protect myself, not just financially, but emotionally. I had spent too many years putting everyone else first, making sacrifices for people who clearly weren't willing to do the same for me. That stopped now. It's been over a month since I made the decision. I haven't spoken to Alice or Maddie since. Through mutual friends, I heard Alice is scrambling to cover the wedding expenses I had been funding. I don't feel sorry for her. She made her choice when she chose to side with her mother. Maddie, though. I still think about her. Part of me hopes there's a future where we can reconcile. But only if she truly understands the gravity of what she did. Only if she's willing to rebuild trust, not demand it. As for Jane, she's a ghost now. I don't care what she does or who she does it with. The divorce is underway and my lawyer assures me she won't get much. That's enough. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I did the right thing. If cutting out the people I once loved was the right call. And then I remind myself of one simple truth. They made their choices, and now I'm making mine. I'm finally free.